November 1943. The Japanese Embassy in Berlin. Baron Hiroshi Oshima, Japan's ambassador to Nazi Germany, sat down to compose yet another encrypted message to Tokyo. He'd just returned from a remarkable 4-day tour of Hitler's vaunted Atlantic Wall, the coastal fortifications stretching along the French coast that the Führer had personally ordered him to inspect. For hours, Oshima had been shown the most intimate details of Germany's coastal defenses: tank ditches, artillery emplacements, the exact positions of German divisions, their manpower, their weaponry, everything. With the meticulous precision of the military officer he'd once been, Oshima crafted a 20-page report. Every detail, every number, every location. He described the armament of turrets positioned close to the shore. He noted the depth of defensive zones. He recorded the placement of individual guns. It was, by any measure, one of the most comprehensive intelligence documents about German defensive preparations that existed anywhere in the world. When he finished, his staff encoded the message using Japan's most sophisticated diplomatic cipher machine, a device the Americans had nicknamed Purple. The encrypted text crackled through the airwaves, transmitted by radio across thousands of miles toward Tokyo. Within hours, Japanese officials would read Oshima's report and understand exactly what Germany had prepared to defend Fortress Europe. But they weren't the only ones reading it. In a nondescript building in Arlington, Virginia, a team of American cryptanalysts intercepted the transmission. They fed it through their own Purple machine, a reverse-engineered duplicate built from nothing but mathematical deduction and brilliant insight. The encrypted jumble transformed back into clear Japanese text. Translators converted it to English, and within a day, Oshima's 20-page report on the Atlantic Wall sat on the desks of Allied commanders planning the greatest amphibious invasion in human history: the invasion of Normandy. D-Day. Baron Hiroshi Oshima had just handed the Allies the keys to Hitler's coastal fortress, and he had absolutely no idea. This wasn't an isolated incident. From 1941 until Germany's collapse in 1945, virtually every message Oshima sent to Tokyo was intercepted and decrypted by American intelligence. Approximately 75 messages in the last 11 months of 1941, about 100 in 1942, 400 in 1943, 600 in 1944, and roughly 300 in the first 4 months of 1945, each one a window into Adolf Hitler's most closely guarded secrets. General George C. Marshall, the U.S. Army Chief of Staff, would later say something extraordinary about this Japanese diplomat. He called Oshima our main basis of information regarding Hitler's intentions in Europe. Think about that for a moment. Not Allied spies embedded in Berlin, not resistance fighters smuggling documents, not reconnaissance photos or captured German officers. Japan's ambassador to Nazi Germany was America's single most valuable source of intelligence about what Hitler was thinking and planning. The story of how this happened represents one of the most remarkable intelligence operations of World War II. It's a tale of mathematical genius and relentless determination, of unbreakable trust exploited and unwitting betrayal. of how Japan's most loyal ally to Nazi Germany became, without ever knowing it, one of the greatest assets the Allies possessed in defeating the Third Reich. And it all began with a machine, a code, and a team of cryptanalysts who refused to accept the impossible. The race against the purple machine. In 1939, American cryptanalysts faced a crisis. For years, they'd been successfully reading Japanese diplomatic communications, encoded by a cipher machine they called RED. The work had been difficult but manageable, providing Washington with invaluable insights into Tokyo's diplomatic strategies and intentions. Then, without warning, the messages stopped making sense. Japan had introduced a new encryption system far more sophisticated than anything they'd used before. The Americans, with their characteristic color coding system for classified materials, dubbed this new cipher purple. And purple was a monster. The Japanese called it the alphabetical typewriter 97, an innocuous name that disguised its revolutionary design. Unlike the earlier red machine, which American cryptanalysts had eventually mastered, purple represented a quantum leap in cryptographic security. The device consisted of two electric typewriters connected by a complex array of telephone stepping switches, the same technology used in automated telephone exchanges. When an operator typed a message on one end, the stepping switches scrambled each letter through multiple pathways before the encrypted version emerged from the second typewriter. The system's security came from its astronomical number of possible combinations. Every letter could be encrypted in billions of different ways, depending on the machine's settings. These settings changed regularly, making even intercepted messages useless unless you knew the exact configuration used when they were sent. The Japanese Foreign Ministry was so confident in Purple's security that they used it for their most sensitive diplomatic traffic, trusting it with state secrets they wouldn't dare send any other way. They believed Purple was mathematically unbreakable. They were wrong, but proving them wrong would require one of the most extraordinary feats of cryptanalysis in human history. The U.S. Army Signal Intelligence Service, headquartered in a modest building at Arlington Hall, took on the challenge. Leading the effort was William Frederick Friedman, a man whose entire adult life had been devoted to the science of codes and ciphers. Born in Russia in 1891, Friedman had immigrated to America as a child and grown up fascinated by Edgar Allan Poe's story, The Gold Bug, which featured a cryptographic puzzle. That childhood fascination had blossomed into genius. By 1939, Friedman had already established himself as America's premier cryptologist. He'd coined the very term cryptanalysis to describe the science of breaking codes. He'd written the definitive textbooks on the subject, and he'd built a small but brilliant team at the Signal Intelligence Service, carefully selecting individuals who combined mathematical aptitude with the patience and creativity needed for cryptanalytic work. 3 men formed the core of Friedman's team. Frank Rowlett, a soft-spoken teacher from rural Virginia who possessed an extraordinary mathematical mind. Solomon Kullback, a mathematician from New York whose analytical precision was legendary. And Abraham Sinkoff, another New Yorker with both mathematical training and language skills. These three had been with Friedman since 1930, learning cryptanalysis under his exacting tutelage, developing their skills on progressively more difficult challenges. When Purple appeared in 1939, Friedman assembled his team and laid out the problem. They had intercepted Purple messages, streams of seemingly random letters that made no sense whatsoever. They had no physical Purple machine to examine, no stolen blueprints, no defector who could explain how it worked. All they had were the encrypted messages themselves and their own intellect. From these foundations alone, they would need to deduce not only how Purple worked, but actually build a functioning duplicate of a machine they'd never seen. It seemed impossible. It took 18 months of exhausting effort, and it nearly destroyed William Friedman in the process. The work was grueling beyond description. Day after day, the cryptanalysts stared at columns of encrypted letters, searching for patterns, testing hypotheses, building mathematical frameworks to describe what they couldn't see. They knew from their earlier work on red that the Japanese had divided their alphabet into groups, treating some letters differently than others. This insight provided a starting point. Frank Rowlett's team made the first breakthrough. Through painstaking statistical analysis of hundreds of encrypted messages, they determined that Purple, like red before it, divided its alphabet into two groups. One group contained 6 letters, the other contained 20. This 6s and 20s structure gave them a framework, a way to begin organizing their attack on the cipher. But knowing the structure wasn't enough. They still needed to understand the mechanism, the actual machine that performed the encryption. This is where the work became truly agonizing. Without seeing the machine, they had to deduce its internal workings purely from mathematical analysis of its output. They tested thousands of hypotheses. Most led nowhere. Some led to dead ends after weeks of work. The pressure was immense, the progress maddeningly slow. Friedman, who led the effort, worked himself to exhaustion. The strain of managing the project while simultaneously performing his own analytical work began taking a psychological toll. He was driven by the knowledge that war was coming, that American lives might depend on breaking this code, that every day they failed was another day America remained blind to Japan's diplomatic intentions. In late 1939, Friedman brought in new talent to help with the monumental task. One of these new hires was a 27-year-old woman named Genevieve Grotjan. She'd graduated summa cum laude with a mathematics degree from the State University of New York at Buffalo. But being a woman in the 1930s had meant no college mathematics department would hire her. She'd been working as a statistical clerk, calculating railroad pensions, when Friedman recognized her talent and brought her into the team as a junior cryptanalyst. Grotjan was assigned to what seemed like the most tedious work imaginable. Day after day, she examined worksheets covered with encrypted and decrypted text, looking for correlations, seeking patterns in the chaos. The work was mind-numbing, requiring intense concentration on subtle mathematical relationships that might mean everything or nothing. September 20th, 1940. 19 months to the day since Purple's introduction. Grotjan was at her desk conducting yet another examination of her worksheets when something clicked in her mind. She could never fully explain what happened in that moment, how her brain suddenly saw what had been invisible before. But there it was. Multiple locations in the worksheets revealed correlations between plain text and ciphertext. The patterns she'd been searching for, hidden in millions of letters, suddenly became visible. She stepped forward to where Frank Rowlett and several other cryptanalysts were gathered in conversation. "I have something to show you," she said quietly. What followed was a moment of pure joy rarely seen in the usually restrained halls of military intelligence. Albert Small, one of the cryptanalysts, threw his arms up like a victorious prizefighter and began dancing around Grotjan's desk, shouting, "Whoopee!" Robert Ferner clapped his hands together, yelling, "Hurrah! Hurrah!" over and over. Frank Rowlett started jumping up and down, crying out, "That's it! That's it! Jean has found what we've been looking for." With Friedman's approval, the usually dignified cryptanalysts kicked up their heels and ordered Coca-Colas all around. They had every reason to celebrate. Grotjan's discovery was the breakthrough they'd been desperately seeking. It revealed correlations that would allow them to reconstruct the internal workings of the purple machine. But identifying the patterns was only part of the victory. They still needed to build an actual machine that could decrypt purple messages quickly enough to be useful. This challenge fell to Leo Rosen, an electrical engineering student from MIT who'd been brought in specifically for his technical expertise. Working from the cryptanalysts' discoveries, Rosen made a crucial deduction. Most cipher machines of the era used rotors, spinning wheels with complex wiring that scrambled each letter. The German Enigma machine used rotors. The earlier Japanese Red machine had used rotors. Everyone assumed purple used rotors too. But Rosen realized that the mathematical patterns revealed by the cryptanalysts didn't match rotor behavior. They matched something else entirely. Telephone stepping switches, the same electromechanical devices used in automated telephone exchanges to route calls, could be repurposed as encryption switches. And, crucially, the Americans knew exactly which model of telephone equipment was available to Japanese engineers, because they'd sold it to them. Using parts worth just $684.65, Rosen and his team built the first American purple machine. It worked. By the end of 1940, they had constructed an exact functional analog of the Japanese purple machine without ever having seen one. When American forces finally captured an actual purple machine in Germany after the war ended, they discovered that their duplicate differed from the original by only 2 wire connections. 2 wires, out of hundreds. The breaking of purple represented one of the greatest cryptanalytic achievements in history. But breaking the code was just the beginning. Now they had to use it, carefully and secretly, to win a war. And their most valuable source of purple intelligence was about to walk into Hitler's inner circle. Hitler's favorite Japanese baron Hiroshi Oshima seemed destined for greatness from birth. His father had risen from provincial samurai origins to become Japan's army minister. Young Oshima followed his father into military service, advancing rapidly through the ranks of the Imperial Japanese Army. By 1934, when he arrived in Berlin as Japan's military attaché, he'd already established himself as a capable officer and diplomat. But it was in Nazi Germany that Oshima truly flourished. He spoke German almost perfectly, having devoted years to mastering the language. More importantly, his political philosophy aligned seamlessly with Nazi ideology. Oshima was an ardent nationalist who believed in Japanese military expansion and the subjugation of what he considered inferior races. These views made him a natural ally of the Nazi leadership. Joachim von Ribbentrop, Hitler's favorite foreign policy advisor, who would later become foreign minister, befriended Oshima almost immediately. Ribbentrop saw in the Japanese officer a kindred spirit, someone who truly understood and shared National Socialist principles. Through Ribbentrop's influence, Oshima gained access to the highest levels of the Nazi hierarchy. In the fall of 1935, Oshima met Adolf Hitler personally. The meeting went extraordinarily well. Hitler, who generally viewed non-Europeans as inferior, made an exception for the Japanese, whom he saw as the Aryans of Asia. He admired Japan's military prowess and imperial ambitions. In Oshima, he found a Japanese officer who admired Germany's military might and shared his views on communism, racial hierarchy, and the need for territorial expansion. The relationship deepened over the following years. Oshima became instrumental in forging the Anti-Comintern Pact between Germany and Japan in November 1936, an agreement ostensibly aimed at containing communist expansion, but really designed to coordinate fascist imperial ambitions. Hitler rewarded Oshima's efforts by promoting his rise through diplomatic channels. In October 1938, Oshima achieved his greatest honor. He was appointed Japan's ambassador to Germany, the highest diplomatic position his country could offer in its most important European ally. Now, he had direct access to Hitler and other top Nazi officials whenever he needed it. That access was briefly interrupted in 1939 when the Nazi-Soviet Non-Aggression Pact shocked Japan's government. Tokyo, which had signed the Anti-Comintern Pact expecting Germany to be a reliable anti-Soviet ally, felt betrayed by Hitler's sudden cooperation with Stalin. Oshima was recalled to Japan in September 1939, his diplomatic career seemingly in jeopardy. But the Nazi government wanted him back. Hitler and Ribbentrop had come to rely on Oshima's understanding and discretion. They valued his military expertise and his ability to explain complex strategic situations to Tokyo. Most importantly, they trusted him completely. When Germany began planning its greatest military gamble yet, the invasion of the Soviet Union, they wanted their most trusted Japanese ally back in Berlin. In February 1941, at Germany's insistence, Oshima returned to Berlin as ambassador. Over the next 4 years, until Germany's collapse in May 1945, he would occupy a unique position. He became one of Hitler's closest foreign confidants, one of only a handful of non-Germans who had the Führer's personal trust. Hitler demonstrated that trust in remarkable ways. After Japan attacked Pearl Harbor in December 1941, Hitler awarded Oshima the Grand Cross of the Order of the German Eagle in gold, one of Nazi Germany's highest decorations. Only 15 people in the entire world received this honor. At the award ceremony, Hitler reportedly told Oshima, "You gave the right declaration of war. This method is the only proper one." That trust translated into unprecedented access. Oshima met with Hitler regularly, sometimes for hours at a time. During these meetings, the Führer would discuss his strategic thinking, his military plans, his assessment of Germany's situation. Hitler seemed to view Oshima almost as a German officer, someone who could be trusted with information he would never share with most of his own generals. Ribbentrop provided Oshima with daily intelligence reports, the same assessments that went to Germany's top military commanders. Oshima was given tours of military facilities throughout German-controlled territory. He visited the Eastern Front and saw firsthand the war against the Soviet Union. He was shown new weapons developments, including Germany's revolutionary jet fighter program. He inspected coastal fortifications in France and discussed defensive strategies with field commanders. And being the meticulous military officer he was, Oshima wrote detailed reports about everything he saw and learned. These reports were his duty, his way of keeping Tokyo informed about Germany's war effort and strategic thinking. He took pride in their comprehensiveness and accuracy. He wanted his superiors in Japan to understand exactly what Germany was doing and planning. Every one of these reports was encrypted using the Purple Machine and transmitted to Tokyo by radio. Oshima had been warned in 1941 by German intelligence officer Heinrich Georg Stammer that there were signs Japanese diplomatic codes might be compromised. But Oshima was convinced that by double encrypting his most sensitive dispatches, he had ensured their security. He trusted Purple absolutely. He was, of course, wrong. And his trust in that cipher machine would turn him into one of the most valuable intelligence assets the Allies possessed. The warning Stalin ignored. In the spring of 1941, Adolf Hitler was preparing the largest military operation in human history. Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of the Soviet Union, would involve more than 3 million German troops, thousands of tanks, and nearly 2,000 aircraft. It would stretch across a front nearly 2,000 miles long and aimed at nothing less than the destruction of the Soviet state. Hitler kept the planning tightly compartmentalized. Even most of his own generals didn't know the full scope until just before the attack. But he told Oshima. On June 6, 1941, just 16 days before the invasion would begin, Hitler met with his Japanese confidant and revealed what was coming. Germany would invade the Soviet Union on June 22nd. Oshima immediately sent an encrypted message to Tokyo, passing along Hitler's revelation. The message crackled through the airwaves, was intercepted by American listening stations, and arrived at Arlington Hall, where the Purple Team decrypted it. The Americans now had precise, detailed advance warning of the largest military operation in history. This created a diplomatic problem. The United States wasn't yet at war, but President Franklin Roosevelt was increasingly aligned with Britain against the Axis powers. British Prime Minister Winston Churchill, despite his deep anti-communism, had already declared that Britain would support the Soviet Union if Germany attacked. The question was whether to warn Stalin. American and British intelligence decided to share the information. Through various channels, including diplomatic communications from Churchill to Soviet officials, they passed along warnings that Germany was preparing to invade. Some of this intelligence came from Ultra, Britain's decryption of German Enigma messages. Some came from Oshima's Purple messages. All of it pointed to the same conclusion. Hitler was about to betray the Nazi-Soviet non-aggression pact and attack his temporary ally. Stalin refused to believe it. The Soviet dictator, despite receiving numerous warnings from multiple sources, convinced himself they were tricks designed to drag the Soviet Union into the war on Britain's side. He had invested heavily in the Nazi-Soviet pact, using it to buy time to build up Soviet military strength. He desperately wanted to believe Hitler would honor the agreement. Moreover, Stalin distrusted British intelligence deeply. He suspected Churchill of trying to manipulate him into war with Germany while Britain sat back safely. When Soviet spy networks, including the famous Richard Sorge in Tokyo, also reported German invasion plans, Stalin dismissed those warnings too. On June 13, 1941, Moscow radio broadcast a statement, apparently written in Stalin's personal style, declaring that rumors of German attack plans were without any foundation and represented clumsy propaganda by forces hostile to the USSR and Germany. At 4:15 in the morning on June 22, 1941, more than 3 million German troops surged across the Soviet border. The attack achieved almost complete tactical surprise. Soviet aircraft sat on their airfields, not camouflaged, easy targets for the Luftwaffe. Soviet troops were not in defensive positions. Command structures collapsed as the German onslaught overwhelmed unprepared units. The initial phase of Barbarossa was catastrophic for the Soviet Union. In the first few weeks, German forces advanced hundreds of miles, encircled and destroyed entire Soviet armies, captured millions of prisoners. The Soviet Air Force was largely destroyed in the first days. Army Group North drove toward Leningrad. Army Group Center smashed toward Moscow. Army Group South pushed into Ukraine. It seemed, briefly, that Hitler might actually achieve his goal of crushing the Soviet Union in a single summer campaign. The intelligence Oshima had provided, filtered through purple decrypts to Allied hands and then to Stalin, might have made a difference. If Stalin had believed the warnings and properly prepared his defenses, positioned his forces, dispersed his aircraft, the initial German onslaught might have been blunted. The catastrophic losses of those first weeks might have been reduced. The course of the entire war might have changed. But Stalin didn't believe. And so the warning that Oshima faithfully transmitted, that American cryptanalysts carefully decrypted, that Allied intelligence dutifully passed along, went unheeded. The opportunity was lost. Yet this was only the beginning of Oshima's unwitting intelligence gifts. Over the next 4 years, he would continue to send detailed reports to Tokyo, each one intercepted and decrypted, each one providing the Allies with priceless insights into Hitler's thinking. And as the war progressed, that intelligence would be used more effectively. The tide of Barbarossa eventually turned. The Soviets retreated, but didn't collapse. Winter came, finding German troops unprepared for the brutal cold. Soviet reserves, brought from Siberia once Japan indicated it wouldn't attack from the east, reinforced the defense. In December 1941, just as winter's full fury hit, the Soviets launched a massive counteroffensive that drove the Germans back from the gates of Moscow. Hitler had failed to achieve his quick victory. The war in the East would drag on for nearly 4 more years, consuming German resources and manpower, bleeding the Wehrmacht white. It would become the decisive theater of World War II, where Germany's fate would ultimately be sealed. And throughout those years, Oshima would continue reporting to Tokyo, never knowing that his messages were being read by those working to bring about Nazi Germany's defeat. The keys to Fortress Europe. By late 1943, the Atlantic Wall had become one of Hitler's obsessions. This massive fortification system stretched along the coast of Western Europe from Norway to the Spanish border, but its heart lay in France, especially along the beaches of Normandy and the Pas-de-Calais. Hitler knew the Allies would eventually attempt an invasion of occupied Europe. The Atlantic Wall was meant to ensure that invasion failed. The fortifications were formidable. Concrete bunkers housed artillery pieces that could sweep the beaches with devastating fire. Steel obstacles and mines covered the tidal zones. Tank ditches and dragon's teeth anti-tank barriers protected approach routes. Entire divisions of German troops manned defensive positions, ready to throw back any landing force. Behind the coastal defenses, mobile reserves waited to counterattack any penetration. Hitler wanted Japan to understand the strength of Germany's defenses. In November 1943, he arranged for Oshima to take a comprehensive 4-day tour of the Atlantic Wall fortifications. The Japanese ambassador was shown everything. German officers walked him through bunker systems, explained fields of fire, demonstrated how overlapping defensive zones would trap attackers. They showed him troop dispositions, revealed which divisions were stationed where, detailed their manpower and equipment. Oshima absorbed it all with a professional soldier's eye for tactical detail. Upon returning to Berlin, he sat down and wrote a comprehensive 20-page report. It was a masterpiece of military observation, noting everything from the exact caliber and placement of individual artillery pieces to the depth of anti-tank ditches. He described the defensive zones in detail, layer upon layer of obstacles designed to slow and destroy an invading force. He identified specific German divisions by name and location, recording their strength and readiness. The report discussed the armament of coastal turrets, the positioning of mobile reserves, the command structure overseeing the defenses. It noted which beaches had the heaviest fortifications and which were more lightly defended. It assessed the Germans' defensive philosophy, their expectations about where the Allies might strike, their plans for counterattack. For any Allied planner contemplating an invasion of France, Oshima's report was an intelligence goldmine. It provided exactly the kind of detailed, comprehensive information that spies and reconnaissance could gather only piecemeal over months or years. It came from a trained military observer who'd been given unrestricted access to see everything. And it was absolutely accurate. The report was encrypted using purple and transmitted to Tokyo. Within 24 hours, American cryptanalysts had decrypted it, translators had rendered it into English, and copies were being rushed to the Allied commanders who would plan Operation Overlord, the invasion of Normandy. General Dwight Eisenhower, Supreme Commander of Allied forces in Europe, received a copy. So did General Bernard Montgomery, who would command ground forces during the invasion. British and American intelligence officers pored over every detail, comparing Oshima's observations with their own reconnaissance data, building a comprehensive picture of what awaited the invasion force. The intelligence was invaluable for planning. Knowing the exact positions of German artillery allowed planners to target them with naval bombardment and airstrikes. Understanding the layout of obstacles helped engineers prepare specialized equipment to overcome them. Identifying which divisions manned which sectors told intelligence officers which enemy forces would be encountered where. But perhaps the most valuable intelligence came not from what Oshima observed, but from what Hitler told him about German expectations. In the weeks before D-Day, Hitler confided to Oshima his assessment of Allied invasion plans. The Führer believed the main invasion would come not at Normandy, but at the Pas de Calais, the narrowest point of the English Channel. Any landings at Normandy, Hitler told his Japanese friend, would merely be diversionary feints. The real attack would come at Calais. This conversation, dutifully reported by Oshima and decrypted by American cryptanalysts, told the Allies something crucial. Operation Fortitude, their massive deception campaign designed to convince the Germans that Calais was the target, was working. Hitler had bought the deception completely. The bulk of German mobile reserves would be waiting at Calais while the actual invasion hit Normandy. Just 1 week before D-Day, on May 29, 1944, Oshima met with Hitler for what would be their last conversation before the invasion. Hitler reiterated his conviction about Calais, expressed confidence that the Atlantic Wall would hold, discussed plans for counterattacking any Allied landing. Oshima sent another detailed report to Tokyo. American cryptanalysts decrypted it. Allied commanders read Hitler's thoughts and knew their deception had succeeded. When D-Day came on June 6, 1944, the invasion forces knew more about German coastal defenses than the Germans could have imagined possible. Naval guns targeted specific bunkers Oshima had identified. Airborne forces avoided heavily defended zones he'd noted. Engineers brought equipment designed to overcome obstacles he'd described in detail. The invasion was still brutal and costly. Men died on Omaha Beach and Utah Beach, fighting through obstacles and enduring artillery fire. But the intelligence advantage the Allies possessed, much of it derived from Oshima's detailed reporting, helped ensure the invasion succeeded. Within weeks, over 1 million Allied troops had landed in France. The liberation of Western Europe had begun, and Oshima, still in Berlin, still meeting with Nazi officials, still sending his meticulously detailed reports to Tokyo, had no idea that his loyalty to the Axis cause had helped doom it. His trust in purple, his confidence that his messages were secure, remained unshaken. He would continue sending intelligence to Tokyo, and the Allies would continue reading every word right up until Germany's final collapse. Hitler's last gamble. By late 1944, Nazi Germany was being crushed between two massive forces. In the east, the Soviet Red Army had driven deep into Poland and was approaching the German border. In the west, Allied armies had liberated France and were pushing toward the Rhine. The 1,000-year Reich that Hitler had promised was collapsing after just 12 years, but Hitler wasn't ready to surrender. In September 1944, he conceived one final, desperate gamble. He would gather Germany's last strategic reserves, its remaining panzer divisions, and elite troops, and launch a massive surprise attack through the Ardennes forest in Belgium. The goal was to split the Allied armies, capture the vital port of Antwerp, and force the Western Allies to negotiate a separate peace. Then Germany could concentrate all its strength against the Soviets. The planning was done in absolute secrecy. Only a handful of top officers knew the full scope. Radio silence was maintained to prevent Allied signals, intelligence, from detecting the buildup. Troop movements were conducted at night. Hitler hoped to achieve the kind of surprise that had worked so spectacularly in 1940 when German panzers had raced through the same Ardennes forest and defeated France. On September 4, 1944, Hitler met with Oshima in one of their regular conferences. The Führer was in an unusually candid mood. He told his Japanese friend that Germany was planning a large-scale offensive in the West. The attack would come soon, Hitler said, and it would change the course of the war. Oshima, as always, dutifully reported this conversation to Tokyo. His encrypted message went out by radio, was intercepted by American listening stations, decrypted at Arlington Hall, translated into English, and distributed to top Allied leaders. By late November 1944, detailed intelligence reports about Hitler's planned offensive were circulating among approximately 20 senior Allied government and military officials. This should have prevented the surprise that followed. The Allies knew Hitler was planning a major attack in the West. They had the information in time to prepare, to reinforce threatened sectors, to position reserves where they could respond quickly. But the warning was ignored. Part of the problem was overconfidence. After the success of the Normandy invasion and the rapid liberation of France, many Allied commanders believed Germany was defeated. They thought Hitler lacked the resources for a major offensive. When intelligence reports suggested otherwise, they were dismissed as unlikely or exaggerated. Part of the problem was the distribution system. Magic intelligence was so closely held, so restricted in its circulation, that many of the officers who needed the information never saw it. The intelligence made it to the top level, but didn't reach field commanders who could act on it. By mid-December, as the date of the attack approached, the warning had been largely forgotten or set aside. Only one Allied commander took the intelligence seriously. General George Patton's intelligence officer, Colonel Oscar Koch, had been tracking the German buildup through various sources. He noted that large strategic reserves were being held in the north, not committed to slowing the Allied advance. Why? On December 9th, Koch briefed Patton about the possibility of a major German counteroffensive. Patton, who trusted his intelligence officer completely, began quietly preparing for exactly such an eventuality. 7 days later, at 5:30 in the morning on December 16, 1944, the German offensive exploded along an 80-mile stretch of the front. More than 200,000 German troops in 30 divisions smashed into 4 exhausted or inexperienced American divisions, holding the quiet Ardennes sector. The attack achieved complete tactical surprise. American units were overrun. Key road junctions fell to German forces, and panic spread through the Allied ranks. The Battle of the Bulge, as it became known, was the largest battle ever fought by the U.S. Army. Over 600,000 American troops would eventually be committed to stopping. By the time the Battle of the Bulge finally ground to a halt in late January 1945, more than 600,000 American soldiers had fought in the freezing forests of Belgium and Luxembourg. Nearly 90,000 were killed, wounded, or captured. It was the bloodiest battle in U.S. Army history. Germany's last great gamble had failed. And yet, in a cruel irony, the warning had been there. Adolf Hitler himself had told Baron Oshima that a major offensive in the West was coming. Oshima had transmitted that information to Tokyo. American cryptanalysts had decrypted it. Allied leaders had read it. The secret messages were correct. But intelligence, no matter how perfect, is only as powerful as the decisions made with it. In this case, overconfidence, bureaucracy, and disbelief meant that one of the most valuable intelligence warnings of the war was not fully acted upon. The result was surprise, chaos, and tens of thousands of casualties. Not because the Allies lacked information, but because they failed to fully trust it. This pattern defined the strange legacy of the Purple Decrypts. Again and again, Baron Hiroshi Oshima provided the Allies with extraordinary insight into Hitler's mind. He revealed Hitler's plans to invade the Soviet Union. He described the Atlantic Wall in meticulous detail. He confirmed that Hitler expected the main invasion at Calais, not Normandy. He warned of Germany's last great counteroffensive in the Ardennes. Time after time, his reports shaped Allied understanding of the war. And all the while, Oshima believed he was serving the Axis cause with absolute loyalty. In reality, he was one of the greatest unwitting spies in history. The Allies never told him. After Germany's collapse in May 1945, Oshima was captured by American forces. He was tried by the International Military Tribunal for the Far East in Tokyo and sentenced to life imprisonment for his role in supporting Japan's war effort. He served several years before being released in 1955. He lived out the rest of his life never fully grasping the true scale of what he had done. The full story of Purple and the magic intercepts remained classified for decades. Even many Allied generals who benefited from the intelligence never knew exactly where it had come from. The cryptanalysts at Arlington Hall, the men and women who broke Purple, worked in total secrecy, their greatest achievements hidden from history for half a century. Only in the 1970s and 1990s did the truth begin to emerge. Only then did historians realize how extraordinary the situation truly was. Japan's most trusted ambassador to Nazi Germany had become, without knowing it, one of the Allies' most valuable sources on Adolf Hitler himself. Not through betrayal, not through espionage, but through absolute trust in a machine that had already been defeated. Purple was supposed to be unbreakable. It was not. And because of that, Hitler's most private thoughts, his deepest strategic beliefs, and his most dangerous plans crossed the Atlantic and landed on Allied desks, sometimes within hours. World War II is often remembered as a clash of armies, tanks, aircraft, and fleets. But behind the front lines, another war was being fought. A war of mathematics, a war of logic, a war of invisible messages and invisible victories. In that hidden war, a small group of cryptanalysts in Arlington, Virginia, changed the course of history, one decrypted message at a time. And at the center of it all stood a loyal Axis diplomat who never knew that every word he sent was helping to bring about the defeat of the very regime he served. Baron Hiroshi Oshima believed he was speaking in absolute secrecy. In reality, he was speaking directly to the enemy. And through him, the Allies read the mind of Adolf Hitler himself.